It's a little bit past 6:30, so I think we are going to get started. Um,
Okay, great.
First of all, welcome to our evening listening session. We held one this afternoon at noon, and we had great participation, lots of questions that we were able to try to address. Um, and I'm just going to get us started here tonight. The first thing is just looking at our agenda. One of the first things we'll start off with is a few ground rules, just so that we understand really what's happening with our webinar and how we are going to operate tonight. The second piece is just looking at some of the recent events and our district's work around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's an important topic for us to spend some time on tonight, given the events that are happening in our world and in our community. Certainly this webinar was initially set up to address the COVID-19 pieces that are present in front of us and that we are going to be planning for and wanting to give you an update on this evening with regards to kind of the present summer and then moving into the fall. And then we'll open it up at the end for questions and comments. Start off with just a few basic ground rules, and some of them just notices so that you know the format that we're working in this evening. This is a live webinar. It is being recorded and streamed on our YouTube channel. Questions can be posed in a few different ways. One option is to raise your hand. I found this afternoon actually the preferred method was to write your question and drop it either into the Q&A box or into the chat box. And then after I'm done with my presentation, I will just work my way through all of those, and so that you can, I'll try to answer as many questions as I'm able to. If you do raise your hand and I'm able to get to the point where we are calling on individuals, just please be aware this is a live recording, and that be sensitive to the language and use of names. I think that's important just as a ground rule. Just as a background piece, as I've done different types of conversations in the public before, this is a live webinar. It is also being recorded and put on our YouTube channel, and our local media often accesses those. So any things that we're discussing here may find its way towards the paper and reporting out to the general population of our community, which I think is great. Panelists, and I'm really speaking for myself here, as I may not have all the answers to all of your questions, but I'm going to do my best to try to foresee some of the questions you may have, answer some of them ahead of time, and then certainly as you have questions throughout the presentation this evening, drop them into the Q&A or into the chat box, and I will get to them at the end of our evening, and we'll spend a considerable amount of time just trying to answer those as well as we can. Some of the panelists we have here tonight are members of our administrative team. Tim Schell's our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, and Steve Summers, our Executive Director of Operations. If there's questions that I'm not able to answer with regards to things related to budget or operational aspects of our district, Steve will jump in, and if there are some things curricular-wise that are beyond what I feel I'm able to answer, I'll invite Tim into the conversation. We also have a number of our board members present this evening, and they are also shown in our panelist section. I know we have Joan Ensign, Brian Hafer, Judy Engelbretson. Dave Betcher, I believe, is attending on the other side of this, on the attending side. And if there's any others that have joined us late, we welcome you. But our board members are not going to be taking any action tonight. They're simply here to listen and to hear your voice. I think walking into tonight and our webinar this evening, it was originally set up around the whole COVID-19 issues, but I feel we'd be remiss if we didn't address some of the things that are happening in our world today. The week of May 25th, we obviously had some racial slurs in our community that found their way onto the social media platforms. We have the Minneapolis situation around George Floyd, and then all the events that are happening today around our community, including in our very close neighboring Madison. As a school district, we've been putting forth quite a bit of effort the last number of years, particularly to work towards improving our practices and helping our students around the whole lines of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And when we look at the things that are happening in our world today, as a school district, we want to support and keep all of our kids and our children safe. and we condemn any of the racism that's occurring in and around in our community and that's impacting our students. And that's a big piece of, I think, what our core mission is as a school district, is to be welcoming to all and to provide an opportunity for our kids to be able to come to school and be safe. And that's really where some of our equity and diversity work was rooted. A number of years ago, we as our members of our administrative team, and I have about 17 to 19 people that sit on our administrative team across the district, from our principals to central office. And we read a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. And not that one book read really is the be and end all, but I think it was definitely a tipping point for us to be thinking differently about how we teach and how kids learn, and how we can support our kids that come to us with different backgrounds, either culturally or linguistically. And it started to challenge our thinking about how we can support all kids. That, I think, really launched us into being more specific in our work, to the point where we've added a strategic planning component to our strategic plan as a district for equity of opportunity for all kids. And that's led to a number of things that we felt needed to occur in order for us to kind of forward this work. And that's really building a strong foundation amongst our staff and bringing conversations to our community, and then working with our students. So through the Teaching Tolerance Speak Up at Schools, which can help us to identify and how do we stand up and have our voice heard. The Dane County Equity Consortium is a consortium that's relatively new. We started it about a little over a year ago. And the Dane County superintendents came together and saw a common body of work around equity and inclusion, diversity, and needs of our students. And we put together a county-wide consortium of school districts, which has now grown from districts from Baraboo all the way down to Janesville, and most districts in between. This past year, we've had programs for our students. We've had professional development and engagement and networking opportunities for members of our school boards, and then just professional development and networking of us as professionals to see how we can better our work in this space. We've had staff attending the Minority Student Achievement Network conference in Madison since 2014. This is a national organization that has their national meeting here each year, and we're able to tie into that and attend. And for me, it's been a very powerful conversation to be able to really talk about some issues that we have in our community with our students, and also with learning from around the country. The National Equity Project is also an area that we are continuing to work with. We've attended some of their conferences and are joining their organization. And then this past year, we became very diligent with our professional development with our staff. Percy Brown, who's a member of the administrative team in Middleton, keynoted our start of the year in August, and really talking with our staff about some of the history of the equity movements, and helping us to understand things like microaggressions and implicit bias. And then that was complemented by Amanda Goodenough, who works in the UW system, who worked with our staff during our February time together. And all of those helped us to build a foundation of learning in a place where we feel that now we can start to scaffold more specific plans in the space for us as a school district. But the whole impetus of this is really to make sure we are serving our students. We've had a few different groups that have formed over the years that I think have really impacted some of our work as professionals too. The Lasonia Doris group and our Justice League were initially, we met with them a few years ago, and we learned a great deal about how we can hear student voices and how that can impact our practices. And they had us thinking about everything from what our curriculum looks like, what kind of books we're reading, how that impacts them, hearing their stories and hearing kind of where they're coming from and how they feel they either fit or don't fit within our school community. I think that Lasonia Doris and the Justice League then opened up a space for our Black Student Union this year, which has really been a positive impact as far as bringing forth continued dialogue amongst our students and our staff. When we take a look at awareness, we need to listen to our students. and we hear some of the experiences that they've had, and we have to set expectations for them that they can follow. And when we know we've had issues with racial slurs and inappropriate language, we've had issues with symbols and the Confederate flag and behaviors that just don't fit in our school setting that make people welcome. And the Confederate flag is an area that I've had a number of questions with, and Mr. Borowski and his team at the high school have done a very proactive job of anything like that that's creating a disruption in our school and making kids uncomfortable. We need to make some movement to eliminate it. And so kids who are wearing that representation are asked to remove it or need to leave for the day. All of these are leading to really challenging discussions, which I think has been healthy for us as a school community. It's leading for us to be looking at different ways that we can deliver curriculum and things that we need to include in our curriculum as well. And I think one of the most powerful things for me is certainly hearing our students and hearing their voice and learning from them. Today I've received messages not only from students, but I've had messages from alumni too, just concerned about what's happening in the world and concerned about their home community and what's happening. And I think that's just a piece that we can forward that conversation, and through us working together, we can be better for it. Our school board has certainly heard this work and resonated with them in their establishment of an equity and inclusion ad hoc committee. I mean, that applications for that closed last week. We had over 80 applicants to that. So that's exciting to be creating an equity committee that is going to inform us as far as some of the things that we may want to be thinking about and how we can improve ourselves as we move forward. So the one thing I guess I would say is this is a nice list to have in front of you tonight, but there's a lot more work to be done. And I know that if we continue to put our focus to it and work together as a school community and as a community of Waunakee, we can make great strides. Now I'm going to shift my gears to another lofty topic, which is just with regards to responding to COVID-19. In March 13th, when schools were closed, we were just heading into spring break. At that point in time, I thought this was probably good timing for us because we had spring break and we'd come back and there'd be potentially a couple of weeks where we may be in a remote situation and then we'd be returning to school. That was obviously a very naive thought because here we are sitting many months later and we're still in a learning at home setting. But we started the learning at home on March 30th. The one piece I just want to share with parents is one, how much I appreciate the support you've given your kids and our staff throughout this time. But I also want you to know that when we look at our delivery models for how we want to deliver education, a 100% learning model for all kids is not something we believe is best. But it's really what we were dealt with, just as businesses have had to deal with what implications they have with COVID-19. The schools have also had to respond to the realities that we've come to know, and that's required us to go to a remote setting. Some of our students have thrived, some I would categorize as have maintained, and some have really struggled. It's really brought forth issues of student and family mental health issues, food insecurities, social isolation. Some of our special needs kids really have found challenges as far as how they find their space and getting all of their needs met. So I'm proud of our staff for the work that they've done. We've really pushed them into a very kind of emergency planning time to deliver this. And if we're in a situation in the future or in the fall, we know we can continue to improve and learn upon what we've done this year. The guidelines that we are following are complex. And when we had the Safer at Home order, that was obviously something that was statewide, that really gave statewide direction. Since that has gone away with the Supreme Court rulings, our guidelines are really coming from a federal level from the CDC, and then from a state level from the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and then our local health department, which is Public Health Madison-Dane County. As we look at kind of the landscape of where we are, the Forward Dane plan is our local health department and Dane County plan for reopening. And that is where we need to be putting our guidelines and who we are working with what's allowed. The closing out the school year and all of the events that are happening this week and into the very early parts of next week, are all dictated by guidelines that are provided to us by public health in order to keep people safe as you pick up your materials or drop things off at school. Graduation has been such a hard piece for us. I mean, our heart is heavy for our kids who have worked so hard to achieve that rite of passage as graduation, and yet we're in a pandemic where we can't get together and recognize them the way that we want to. It's always one of my favorite ceremonies of the year with our students and getting to greet them on stage, and we have to do it differently. We have in the early parts of June a virtual graduation that will take place, and we're holding out hope that there may be some opportunities or in the August 1st timeframe to potentially do something, even if it's at a reduced level, to be able to interact in some respect with our graduates. So that's to be coming. But the Forward Dane plan is really the reopening plan for Dane County. We are in phase 1 as of May 26th. That'll be reviewed 14 days from that time period. The one piece that's unique about schools is that when the Supreme Court made their ruling that overruled the safer at home orders from the State Department of Health Services, the one thing that they kept in place, though, was school facilities are closed for instruction and extracurriculars through June 30th. So we are not able to hold any sort of instruction or extracurricular activities in our buildings per that order, and per the ruling that came out of the Supreme Court. So even if schools if we did enter phase 2, which I anticipate is coming in the coming weeks, our until June 30th or after June 30th, we're not able to do anything within our schools per that order. We are working right now at really trying to scaffold out what our plans are for summer and for the fall, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And our school board has been excellent to work with, and they're going to be meeting twice a month as we kind of work our way through the summer and through the COVID issues, because they're just coming at a rapid pace, and we want to be able to chunk out some of the decisions so that we can plan accordingly and communicate to all of our stakeholders what's happening and where we're at. And then the one piece I just want to point out to everyone is, with the state orders going away, really county public health departments are the places where local decisions are made. So if you move into Columbia County, Sauk County, we live in Dane County, all of those counties have a little bit different orders and are dealing with things differently. So you may see things with schools, businesses, et cetera, in different parts of our state that are doing different things because it's really become regionalized. Summer school is not that far off. Starting on June 22nd, we are going to begin summer school at our regular time. However, because our schools need to be closed till June 30th, as I had previously explained, our first session of summer school will be 100% virtual. We are hoping and anticipating that we will be moving into phase 2 of the Forward Dane plan. And if that is the case, then we will have some consideration of what we might be able to do for the second session. Now, I realize that there are parents who have very different views as far as should we be moving back into schools and bringing kids together or not. And what we are looking at is how can we start to potentially look at programs. I would not see a full reopening of summer school at that point. I think it would be something where we may select some programs that make sense for us to be able to bring kids in safely and for us to gain some experience of how to work with kids and how to work with all of the mandates that we are going to have to keep everybody safe in school. So that'll be a piece that Sheila Wyatt, who is our director of summer school, is working on. She and I have been in contact, and we'll be having conversations with the board at our June 8th meeting. I think the other piece that we will need to be keeping in mind is, even just because you can come back, we also need to make sure that we're ready to do so. So we need to look at realistically, as we kind of lay out these plans, are we in a place where we feel we can do that safely? And that'll be a voice that I will carry forward, as that we want to do so in a way that mitigates risk to the degree that we are able to. Transportation I've added on here at the bottom because it's going to be one of our larger challenges, and it's going to be because of social distancing within a bus. The current guidelines we have has guidelines of capacity of 15 students per bus, and you can see just on the scale of how many kids we have in transportation, not only during summer school, but as we return in the fall. If those guidelines remain, then there's going to be some pieces and challenges with us on a scalability perspective as far as how we can operate. So I'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Summer school, there's some feedback from the surveys that you responded to as parents, offered some opportunities for us to create some additional classes that particularly fit into a virtual format, and I appreciate our staff getting creative to think of some ways that we can continue to keep our kids involved throughout our summer months. Outside groups and use of our facilities. I mean, our facilities are very, very popular. Throughout the school year and throughout the summer, they are often filled with outside groups who are utilizing them. We discussed this at our last school board meeting, and we have decided that we are going to really hold on adding any additional outside groups to our facilities until we're able to reintroduce our own programs to the district. Once we do that, then and we have some protocols in place, we'll be reevaluating that with our school board. That'll probably happen sometime this summer. The reopening plan is a piece that I want to take a little bit of time just talking through with you. And I'm going to start off at the very bottom with my last bullet point. And the one piece that I find that's different with schools than when we look at opening different other parts of our society is just the scale of the number of people that we are dealing with. When you look at 4,300 students and 600 staff, almost 5,000 people that we're dealing with trying to bring together into our 6 school buildings. And when I look at those pieces, it's not as easy as just thinking of a classroom that maybe has 15 people in it, but scaling that to the size of a building, and then how do we maintain and keep people safe within those parameters. So starting with that, you start to now see kind of where transportation becomes a challenge. With a guideline of 15 students per bus, that causes us to really have to think of how we are going to structure our days in order to help with transportation, and are there going to be opportunities where we have to change some of our practices and potentially seek your assistance with helping with transporting your own children. We are anticipating additional guidelines coming out in the next week or so from the state that will be then reviewed by our local health department. But the numbers that we've been provided thus far are right in that 15 students per bus issue. Wellness checks and how do we keep our kids safe? And those are some pieces that we are going to have to take a look at. It's through training of our staff for kids that are ill. How do we address children that become sick at school? We work with kids. We know that they become sick, not just with COVID-19, but with a plethora of other issues. And how do we deal with that during this time frame? And then how do we kind of look at screening kids coming in? There's been conversations about, and you can see in different venues, thermometers and temperature checking. And then you look at just the challenges with people who are asymptomatic. And then as parents, and my wife and I do the same thing. When our kids have a fever, we provide them Tylenol to break their fever, help them feel better. All of those things kind of just complicate our matters as far as how we keep kids safe, how we screen kids, how we do all of those things to bring our children back to school. Face masks is another PPE. How does that impact students? How is that going to impact staff? There's some additional guidelines coming out. If you look at some of the daycare regulations that are out right now, they're recommended for staff, but they're silent on students. And I think particularly when you look at some of our younger students and some of our students with special educational needs, face masks are a very difficult thing, and it becomes probably more of an enforcement issue than a piece that's going to potentially be something that we can just vastly implement across our district. So we're going to be looking very carefully at how we can structure that. But I see that the guidelines coming out probably being more in the realms of recommendations versus requirements. When I start to think about instruction, it really goes back to the conversation we had about transportation and the number of students we have, and then looking at our guidelines for what kind of group sizes are we going to be able to bring back on September 1st? What are the social distancing rules we're going to need to take into account, and what's our ability to meet those requirements? So if you think of even our smallest school, it has about 500 kids in it. It has probably 50 additional adults. So 550 people, it's probably going to be a very difficult piece for us to bring those folks together and meet the guidelines that we're seeing that are potentially going to be coming and being a guide to us opening school. Looking at half capacity in a classroom, that's potentially like 15 kids in a room. But then how do you mitigate the social distancing and the interaction of them as you start to deal with recess, lunch, et cetera. So those are all the pieces that we're starting to look at. I want you to be very honest with you. There could be a situation where we are face to face and we have gotten to a place as a society where we can do more. There could be a situation where we become remote, similarly to how we are now. I hope that is not where we land. And I think there's a real possibility that we need to find alternate schedules that are a combination of face-to-face, maybe every other day schedules, or there's a lot of other models out there that we're going to be studying this summer and seeing how those fit with our guidelines and some of our local decisions that we make. So I just need to put that on your radar that social distancing group sizes impact us based on our size of our organization, number of our kids and staff, transportation needs. We also realize, as I kind of move on here, that some students may want to stay virtual. I've heard that from some parents. I heard that this morning, and I've received some emails from parents. We're looking at how that type of a model also fits, particularly as we know we have students and very honestly, we have staff who may be high risk, and some of the ways that we need to accommodate them through any reopening plans. I think the piece I just wanted to leave you with this is that we are in the stages right now of starting to scaffold what this plan looks like. We're starting to put together our work teams as far as how we can dive deeper into each of these items. And we are anticipating some further guidance from some of our state and local agencies that will help us at least guide us with some of the questions that we need to be considering as we look at these. But it's not, unfortunately, as simple as just opening back up the school and everything returns to normal, as much as I think we would all love that to be the case. And the other pieces, and if you've worked in a business and you see some of the protocols that have to be happening, we're in a very similar place. The hygiene, cleaning, protective measures, and then training for staff are all important pieces for us to have procedures and protocols for, and we're required to do so. So we'll be continuing to work in that realm as well. Communication in an evening like this and webinars like this are things that seem to be working well, at least from my feedback from this afternoon. And I think we may be needing to do some of these throughout the summer months to keep you informed. Our school board is going to be meeting twice a month, as I mentioned earlier. And if there's one thing I've learned through the last few months, it's taking things one step at a time. And these things are continuing to change, not quite as rapidly as they were 2 months ago when they were changing almost every few hours. Now we're seeing just continual evolutions every few days and every few weeks. I think it's prudent for us to take steps at a time, make decisions, communicate those out, and then move forward. I do anticipate that we're going to have some solid plans so that you as parents and community members can see where we're going for the fall. Probably by the end of July, and for us to be able to build the capacity and for us to be ready for whatever model we're in come September. So with that, I have come to the end of my part of the presentation. I appreciate you bearing with me as I've really tried to cover a lot of pieces. What I'm going to do right now is stop my sharing piece so that I can get a better sense of some of the questions that are out there. I'm going to bring up my chat line. So if there's any questions that anybody has for the chat, you're welcome to add those in there. At the moment, I don't see any that are in there, and I'll look at the questions that we have. One of the questions is, if school days are in an alternate basis, will days be longer hours to maximum time in school as well as parents' ability to work? At this point, I would probably see that the school days would not be any longer. Part of that is going to be also looking at just how we accommodate and work with our staff, because it's going to require all of our staff to be on board with the work that's occurring, even if it's on a modified level. And we're also going to be probably be trying to repurpose how we're utilizing everybody to help support all of our kids in an environment. I would see it probably being in a regular type of a school schedule, but we may have to do some alternate days. This absolute speculation right now. I don't have a solid plan that we're rolling out and saying this is exactly what we're doing. Talking to my superintendent colleagues, we're in the Dane County area, we're meeting at least once a week. Most districts are in the same place we are. They're realizing what the future may hold and trying to wait for some of these guidelines to come in so that we can put some more specific plans in place and then communicate them out to parents. Next question I have is, what feedback have I gotten from families about virtual learning, and will there be a survey after school is out? We've continued to do surveys to get feedback, and that's certainly a piece that we want to continue to weigh into that. The feedback we've gotten, I think, as you can predict, it's similar to what I mentioned earlier. It's mixed. We've had some families that have done extremely well to the point where they probably hadn't thought about trying a virtual environment, and it's worked out well for their kids. Many, it's kind of in the middle of the road where I think that the kids could have done more, but they've maintained where they're at. And for some, they've really struggled. The piece that we looked at for this year was just trying to look at kind of the inequities of what we have with all of our students. As you get north of town, our internet connections are not nearly as solid as they are if you're in town. So we've had some challenges with connectivity for kids. Computer access, when you have families that have multiple family members and rotating through those devices, and then parents who've had to work throughout the pandemic and older siblings helping out younger siblings. So we've had to do a blending of live instruction and also things that have been recorded so that people could access it at a time when they're available. Next one is appreciate the communication. Well, I appreciate the kind comments there. Thank you. Why does the high school dress code explicitly prohibit the Confederate flag since there can be no ambiguity? Why doesn't the high school dress code explicitly? Yeah, and that's a really good question. Brian Borowski and I have had that conversation. I know that's something that he would actually like to have spelled out more specifically. As we went into the school year when the Confederate flag became an issue for us, we were still able to address it through other means. So at this point, it's not specifically outlined in there. Anytime it's showing up at school, it certainly is a disruption, and that's something that we can control at any point. It's also a piece that he has been communicating with students about its inappropriateness and how it impacts our other students, which is why it's not allowed. I'm going to jump over to the chat here. Will you be looking at pairing siblings to make it easier for families? That's a really good question. And that's if you were to do something on alternate days. Steve Summers, our director of operations, he and I had that conversation just the other day, as far as if we had to do an alternative schedule, how do we try to accommodate parents, and how do we try to accommodate the routes that we would do for any sort of transportation? So that's definitely a piece that's on our mind. I don't have a specific plan for that, but that's also on our planning list to realize that the siblings and family groups are important, particularly as you look at families working and potentially needing older siblings to help out with the younger. So been any talk of doing some school during normal hours and a second set of school in the evening. We haven't really got to that level of really diving deeply into some of the different models. We haven't dove into that specific question. And particularly, we're also looking at just our availability of staff to be able to kind of accommodate multiple levels of schedules. One of the things that a conversation that came up today was, can we just rent more space to add more classrooms in areas that might be available in our community? I think one of our limiting factors is then by adding staff so you can lower class sizes and potentially have more people, you also then have to have staff that can move into those positions. And that's, and depending on the area, it's not an area that we have a lot of staff to be able to do that. So part of this is logistical with staffing as well, and that's part of our conversations we'll be having as we look and vet out some of these different options. This is a question that someone joined late. Will this be on the district website? Actually, this is being live streamed and recorded. So I will send out a message tomorrow that will direct parents to, and anybody, to our YouTube site where you can watch not only this webinar, but our webinar from this afternoon and any of our previous school board meetings. Yeah, appreciate the feedback on the communication. We're doing our best to try to keep people informed. So I appreciate the feedback on how we're doing in that realm. To whom can citizens provide feedback to the Dane County health community on any decisions to consider reopening schools in the fall? Are there any surveys? I'm not aware of any surveys that have come out from public health, but I would say if you go directly to the public health Madison Dane County, and I don't know specific if there's a place to communicate, but I'm hoping that to find a place that you would be able to at least ask a question. And Chris, I think you could pose that piece there to them. All right, thanks, Mike, for answering that. Does the concept of alternating school include the 4K programs, or would there be a change to that program? That's a piece. Amy Johnson is our administrator who oversees and works with our 4K sites. That's a conversation that she has posed to us this week as we start our planning and starting to lay some of our options out, is how does this fit in with our 4K programs, being that they are not only programs of the school district housed in our preschool settings, but also fall under some different rules with regards to preschools. So that's a piece that we will have to vet out and see how do those rules coexist together and how can we provide those programs. So there'll be more information coming on 4K. How realistic is it that the curricula can be designed in a short period of time to adapt to virtual or a combination of virtual instruction? How is this going to happen over the next 2 months? A few different things. First of all, we've had a lot of experience the last 2.5 months that I think we had a very steep learning curve, and we learned some things that worked and some things that probably didn't work as well as we had anticipated. So I think that's one. I think that's true for parents and our students as well. The second part is we do have some work that we will be engaging with our staff in over the summer. And then I'm working to really rearrange some of our calendar for next year, not specifically to address any of our student days, but to address some of our professional development days with staff and move more of those to right before school in August. So we have a more of a concerted time where they can receive some additional training if they need it, and also some time to collaborate and plan for how they would deliver our instruction moving forward. The one thing we know is that we moved into this spring with one model of instruction and a very steep learning curve for all of us. We've learned some things, and we believe we need to also find ways that we can continue to improve if we find ourselves back in a virtual environment in the fall. The piece that I would add is I truly hope that we're able to, at a minimum, be in some sort of a blended environment, because I think the face-to-face piece would certainly help us to mitigate some of those things. But obviously, as you see from some of the previous slides, there are some challenges that we have to work through and some different models that are impactful not only to the instructional side, but also the families. I thought on starting school earlier in mid-August and then possibly releasing in Thanksgiving. This was a question I received this afternoon as well. Right now, what we are looking at is still maintaining the same schedule for the school year with the September start and then continuing to move that through. Our anticipation is that we need some time in August with all of our staff back to as I was answering the previous question. And we also are trying to stick to the schedule that we're able to, in hopes that as we get into the fall, that there's going to be more and more opportunities for us to get our students back. As soon as we are able to, we will transition to having our students back to normal as soon as that is going to be allowed. So that is certainly our hope. I understand the concept behind kind of creating those breaks at Thanksgiving time around some of the higher flu type seasons. At this point, that's not one of the options that we have on the table right now, but it's certainly something it's not one we have on the table right now, basically because I feel we need to focus on some of the planning for launching the school year and needing some time with our staff. All right, thank you. If school is online, will there be a pass-fail? Oh, great question. I don't know the answer to that tonight. I anticipate if we were completely virtual in the fall, and I have a hard time picturing that being the case, we need to revisit kind of our approach to how we're going to do assessment and working through our curricular issues there. I mean, certainly going to pass-fail this spring, it really was driven by a lot of challenges just on trying to keep a level playing field for all of our students. But if we find ourselves there in the fall, I think that's a piece that we're going to have to revisit and see what our options are. We haven't made any decisions. My hope is that we could find some other ways to do that. If some or all of instruction needs to be online, will the district be looking at other technological solutions other than Seesaw? Right now, Seesaw is the one that we are using for the elementary level. I think that's a conversation that we'll have with our principals and our curriculum folks and our staff as we kind of reassess this year. At this point, I have not heard if there's a preference to move to another platform. I mean, again, my hope is that we're not fully virtual, that we can do some level at least of a blended environment, which hopefully can mitigate some of the shortcomings that the online platforms have. All right. So I'm going to jump back over to this one. If school days are on an alternate basis, will days be long? I think we already answered that one. Will feedback families on virtual learning, will there be a survey when school's out? We answered that one. Dress code. My daughter saw multiple students at the high school on multiple days throughout the year wearing Confederate flags. One of the teachers asked the student wearing this garb about it, but did not appear to know how to handle the situation. What training are you doing? Awesome question. This is actually a piece that we are spending quite a bit of time is, and when I talk about kind of building those foundations, it's how do we have these difficult conversations? How do we address things? And how do we speak up when we are in a situation where we need to make some change, just as the example that you posed there. I know Mr. Borowski and our other principals in the buildings are certainly wanting to address those things, and we're providing the background and opportunities for our staff to come to us if they need some help with how to answer those. Certainly they can turn those over to our administration, and then we will address them. But certainly a part of our process needs to be helping our staff to be in a place where they feel like they can, one, identify things, and two, have some ability to address them. Will there be considerations taken with regards to how the curriculum will be created? For example, would there be any way that a structured schedule, where'd I go? I lost myself. Where was it?
Randy, this is Tim. I apologize. I was typing in an answer, and that may be why it went off your answer.
Oh, you answered my question for me, and it disappeared. Thanks, Tim. All right, thank you for the feedback there. Will there be testing to gauge the success of virtual learning by the students and teachers? How will the state DPI adjust going forward based on success, failure of virtual learning? Great question. One of the things that I was asked this afternoon, and I think this is in the same vein, is are we going to be assessing every kid as far as where they're at and then adjusting curriculum to address that? I mean, one of the things we want to be careful of is that we don't try to walk into next fall and then back the curriculum up to March of when we left, because that's going to have a ripple effect for our kids all the way through their experience. We believe, and through some of the research that we've read, that kids are very elastic in their learning. We also have a cyclical curriculum that does bring concepts back. And part of our process with working with our staff is formative assessments to assess where our kids are on the things that we are teaching them. So certainly there's going to be assessments that we will be doing with our kids as we are instructing them in their materials. And then as we see areas that we need to address or change our instruction, we will certainly be doing that. I don't see much from DPI as far as how they're going to necessarily be looking at the success or failure of this. I think they realized everybody was doing the best they can in this situation. But certainly we feel that we've learned a lot and we can continue to grow in this area. And that's what we will strive for in the fall. And as far as, I know there was a question I had about will there be kids that are going to be like retained? At this point, that's not a piece that we are entertaining. Certainly there are some kids that have had some challenges at our secondary level where they haven't attained even through the pass-fail system, may have some credit recovery to do. And we will continue to address that as we move forward with summer school and into next year. Are you working with the wraparound care programs, daycare, so that they can adjust to any changes in the school schedule? I haven't been part of those conversations, and I can't speak specifically if Amy Johnson, our 4K director, has had those conversations, but that's an excellent point for us to take a look at. Certainly, I understand that anytime that there's going to be a change or an impact of your kids in school, it has a direct corollary to anything that's happening with daycare programs. So that's a great one for us to at least get answers to for you. Regarding students and racism, have you ever considered requiring racial sensitivity equity training for students instead of punishments and suspension? Yes, there's been a number of things that we've tried to do with that. I know Brian Borowski too has wanted to bring some speakers in for our entire student body. And one of the pieces with doing that, and I think we're at the point now where we can do more of those things as a larger student body, is when you have a speaker come in on any topic that really comes into sensitive nature. So whether it's race or equity or some of the things that people we brought in for drugs, alcohol, suicide prevention, all of those things, the reciprocal piece of that is that it then follows its way back to the classroom. So we need to make sure that we also prepare our staff so that when the kids return to the classroom, that they can then be able to confidently lead some of those conversations and answer questions. So that is a piece that we are definitely is on our radar. We're trying to do more work to help our staff be ready for those things, build a foundation so that we can also do that. But yes, we are looking at some options there. And I do know that not everything is strictly just punishment. There's kind of a blending of punishment and consequences, but also some of the restorative practices to help kids understand kind of the impetus of their behavior and how it impacts others. So I think there's a blending of those two. You mentioned high school in your response to that question. Have you considered curriculum or assembly seminars at earlier ages? Yes, we've done some. I think the place that we've probably gone to, I think it's probably most easily, is we've had some of our high school students who have really looked at ways that they can help and lead some of our younger kids. So we've had members of our Lasonia Doris, our Justice League, and I believe our Black Student Union have done some work with kids in other schools. So that's a place that we've started with that. But certainly that's a piece of feedback I can pass on to our other administrators. Many parents want to see virtual learning try to mirror traditional classroom learning, i.e. teachers interacting with students over Zoom, lectures, etc., especially for elementary school. Parents did not think that teachers were actually teaching. How do we get back to the fundamental core of students actually being taught by their teachers? I think there's two pieces that go along with answering that question. And I think one of them is answering kind of why we took the approach that we did. And some of it is based off of just not every child is in a place where they're supported in their learning like every other child. So we have kids whose both their parents were working. So we needed to create situations that was where they could do the learning at the time that there was someone there to help them. And that might have been a parent, it may have been an older sibling. Certainly we had some of the Zoom meetings or the Google Meets. I know I saw those with my children that occurred that would happen where there were interactions, and particularly on the social end, I think that was important. The other piece is looking at just the amount of screen time, was trying to mitigate how do we navigate that. I know I've had some questions over, I have a third grader and their time for learning was very much truncated down to what the regular school day is. And I think that's something you see with virtual learning environments and any of these type of things, is that they don't span over a 7.5-hour day, but they span over a much less of a time, particularly because of some of the efficiencies that can be built in, and two, because of some of the screen time issues that are there. But we definitely know that there's areas how we can improve upon this. One of the challenges I know that we had was our kids did not have their materials. They're still in their desks. That was part of a function of us hitting spring break when we did, and then having guidelines from public health that we really couldn't get all of you back into school or a way that we could get those materials to you. So I know our staff and our directors would have much preferred to have some of those learning materials in front of you, so some of that could have continued in a much more seamless way. It just wasn't something that we were able to, and it was a function of the timing of when all this came. So I fully get that and understand some of the frustrations that may have been part of that. When it comes time to plan for instructional model in the fall, if online at all, will the district be researching equitable instructional models and following evidence-based suggestions? Yes, that is a piece that we'll absolutely be looking at different models of. We've already started some of that research. Knowing we've seen some of the models of what's coming out of the Department of Public Instruction as far as how we can go about delivering instruction. And certainly one of the guiding principles I think we have to have is, you know, there's multitudes of them, but one of them we have to look at is how do we help to mitigate the issues of equity within our system. That was a piece we did on the fly this spring, and it was particularly evident when we looked at access to technology and access to the internet, and the number of families that we needed to help support, not only with devices, but also with finding them ways that they could connect with the internet, because that was their conduit to any interactions with our staff. So that is absolutely a piece that we have to be looking at. What is the next step regarding the kids that were involved in that racial incident? First of all, I think the next piece is really, it resides with the police department. I know that I've been in contact with Police Chief Kreitzman. He's talked to me about the situation as far as how that is following forward. I think some of the issues I just need to be honest with is the students that were involved in that certainly were youth in our community that are not continuing students in our district. So as far as a district response, our response is really using that as an educational piece for the rest of our students to make sure that we are getting across the appropriateness and the impacts of those type of racial slurs and how they impact our community and people. And that's a piece that we have to use as an educational tool. But as far as the specific kids involved with that, that resides right now with law enforcement. I've contacted my local state representative and left my name and number to discuss. As expected, I never received a call back. I think it's important right now to continue to reach out to our legislators. I mean, I think that's a piece that's a communication of the experiences that we're having and kind of the needs that we have. So I think anything that you're doing, and I appreciate you doing that, because I think that that's part of our story that we need to tell is what's happening within our schools and how can we as a state kind of support that. And try to go back here and see where I left off. Let's see, so I support that. How will you deal with teachers who may get COVID in the fall and 14 days of quarantine? Yeah, that's a great question. One of the pieces that we have to have protocols for is what happens if a student, staff member, visitor to the school, anybody has COVID or has an experience there. I know that there's some protocols coming out for our nurses to be able to follow as far as contact tracing and all of the different aspects that kind of go along with the health side of this issue. And public health is going to be giving, as they move forward with some of these plans, some guidelines as far as how we deal with the exact situation you have. One of the roles that public health absolutely has in their role is to help our community agencies and our schools address keeping people safe. So if we have teachers or we have staff or we have students who do come down with COVID-19, we're going to have protocols in place that address that. And your question about 14 days of quarantine or how do we do that, we're going to have to look at sick days, and all of those pieces are part of what Brian Grabarski, our HR director, is going to have to make sure that our staff have an understanding of kind of what those pieces look like and what their options are if we find ourselves in that situation. But I think it's complicated not only from an employer standpoint with our staff, but it's also certainly a piece that when we have kids in the building, it impacts many families as well. So we'll have communication out on that once all of those protocols and decisions are made, so that you can absolutely kind of see that picture and then make some decisions as a family. I appreciate the feedback on the pass-fail. I know that's been certainly a situation from parents that there's been varying viewpoints on it. So I appreciate those of you who've contacted me on both sides of that issue to help understand where that comes from. Have there been discussions about shortening or eliminating other breaks, fall, winter, spring, to allow for more person instruction days? One of the things I think we have to look at from an instructional standpoint is also, and I realize our primary focus is serving kids, but I also look at this, and this kind of falls to the operational and the business side, is how do we operate our school district within the parameters of some of our budget constraints. And as we start to add instructional days, we add additional times to our staff. And all of those continue to compound some of the cost factors that we also have to keep in mind. So extending the school year so that it's longer is not really a fiscal option that we can afford at this point. And there's not dollars coming in to help offset any type of work like that. In regards to our children and social media, have you thought about speaking with your staff and school board members around commenting their distaste for certain groups in the sports or sports teams? It seems like it would be a good way to lead by example. I mean, I think that we, as an organization, need to continue to have communications about social media, and that's with our staff and with our students as well. Is the district looking at other countries like China to see how they are getting back to school? Actually, a very interesting question, because I know Tim Schell, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, has many connections with the Department of Public Instruction, and that was very much a conversation that he was having, and shared with me some feedback that we received from some other countries that are a little bit ahead of us, or on a different return to school schedule. So yes, we are looking at some of those models and trying to see what they look like. From the ones that I've seen so far, it's very similar type models to what we're talking about here, but definitely there's things to learn from our partners overseas and who are experiencing these in a different time frame. Let's see, where was I? Okay. Equity, racial incident. The high school is seriously considering limiting the grading system to pass-fail for any further semesters. Can that be made optional, so that not to prevent high-performing students from demonstrating their academic achievement to colleges via their GPAs? Absolutely. We have to give some thought to how we're going to be doing grading in the future. At this point, we haven't had conversations about what that looks like under different models, but certainly appreciate your comment there. And we realize the issues around grading, and our movement to pass-fail was certainly in a response to this spring, but we'll have to revisit that completely as we kind of move forward for fall, and we'll continue to communicate with parents as some of those discussions take place. All right. All right. Okay, this is very helpful. You teach at Madison Middleton Cross Plains, and appreciate some of the things that are happening in Waunakee to support our kids. So the online instruction has been challenging. I appreciate. No, thank you for the comments. I think our staff are really doing the best that they're able to. I'm very proud of their efforts in reaching out. And I know in interactions that I've had with our administrators who are working with their staff, there's definitely a commitment and to want to do the best that we're able to, given the situations that we find ourselves. And I can speak for all of our staff that we absolutely miss your children. That's why we get into education, is to work face-to-face with kids, not to necessarily interact in this type of a format. We're people persons. And that's a piece that I've always, that's why I'm in this industry, is to work with kids. And certainly trying to navigate a pandemic and some of the very challenging things around race and other social issues are issues that we need to do. And I think that if we can continue to work together, we can find our way to a place where we can be back together and hopefully learn from all of our experiences. I think that comes to the end of all of my questions that I've seen. Is there any that I have missed here? All right. Well, with that, right now we are at about 7:30. We've been at this for about an hour. I just want to really appreciate everybody who's in attendance tonight. It looks like we've had about 100 people generally over the course of the evening. And this will be available on our YouTube channel, and I'll be sending it out, the links to that, starting tomorrow. But thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate all that you've done for your kids, and I appreciate your patience as we work through all of these questions, and certainly appreciate on a personal level just the support that we've had, particularly when we don't have the answers to all the questions that you're posing. But we will work over the coming weeks to be able to do that, or coming months to be able to do that and communicate those to you in advance so that you can make plans. So thank you very much. Have a great evening, and there's still a little bit of light outside, and have a good night. Thank you.
And we're out. It was 1 hour and 2 minutes.
Well, you know, he had it done.